There are places in the galaxy where history lingers, worlds where the past is not merely remembered but imprinted, burned into the very soil, whispered by every shadow, carried on every storm. One such place is a city, not Coruscant, the shining heart of the Republic, not Korriban, the ancient tomb world of the Sith, but a metropolis raised in secret, shrouded in eternal storms, and forgotten for centuries. Kaas City. Once it was the greatest Sith capital ever built, a dark reflection of Coruscant itself, a functioning metropolis of millions where Sith Lords ruled openly, where citizens lived and worked beneath the watchful eye of the Emperor and his Dark Council, and from its spires, fleets were launched, armies were raised, and wars were planned and won that would shake the very balance of the galaxy and the Force. And yet today, Kaas City is nothing more than ruins. It stands as a symbol of both the power and the fragility of the ancient Sith. A city that rose from desperation, thrived in secrecy, and fell into silence, not conquered by any Jedi, not burned by the Republic, but undone by the very forces that created it. To understand Kaas City is to understand the nature of the Sith, their endurance, their brilliance, their cruelty, and their inevitable self-destruction. In this exploration, we will trace the city's entire arc. First, the odyssey that brought the shattered Sith survivors to a forgotten colonial world, and the dark rituals that transformed it into a fortress of storm. Then, the rise of the city itself, a sprawling metropolis that reveals the Sith society and what it would look like at its height. And finally, its fall to ruin, a haunting reminder that even without Jedi intervention, the Sith will always turn their greatest creations to dust. The Odyssey and the Exile. The story of Kaas City begins not in triumph, but in ashes. The Great Hyperspace War ended not in a stalemate, not in an uneasy truce, but in annihilation. The Republic, victorious after a desperate struggle, vowed that the Sith would never threaten them again. The Jedi too saw no reason to show mercy now. What followed was not a retreat or an exile, what followed was a purge. The combined forces of the Republic and the Jedi descended on the Sith homeworlds. Korriban, Ziost, every colony that they could reach. Entire cities were razed. Populations numbered in the millions were slaughtered. Monuments and temples that had stood for centuries left in ruin. It was one of the greatest genocides in the history of the galaxy. And for the first time, the Sith were not predators, they were prey. It is often described in broad strokes that the Sith fled or went into hiding. But the truth is far more brutal. They were hunted, their ships pursued into deep space, their strongholds rooted out and destroyed one at a time. Sith who lingered too long on a world were exterminated, their bloodlines severed, their knowledge lost. For the first time, the Sith were not merely weakened, they were truly beaten. Yet even in defeat, the Sith would not yield. From the ashes rose one figure who would reshape their destiny, Tenebrae, the Dark Lord who would later become known as Emperor Vitiate. More than any other Sith, Vitiate understood that survival required patience. Where others would have scattered, hiding in small enclaves or seeking revenge in futile strikes, Vitiate had a vision of consolidation. He gathered the survivors, drew to those who would follow, and commanded them to abandon what remained of their broken empire. This was not the proud Sith march of old, it was a flight into the unknown. For 20 years, the shattered remnants of the Sith undertook a desperate odyssey across the galaxy's uncharted frontiers. The journey was a brutal one. Treacherous hyperspace lanes shredded ships as they navigated paths no one had charted in millennia. Beasts of impossible scale lurked in the void, preying on stragglers. On world after world, the Sith attempted to establish footholds, only to be discovered and hunted again by Republic forces still scouring the galaxy for any survivors. Every step of the way, their numbers dwindled. The Sith, once feared for their unrelenting power, found themselves constantly on the edge of extinction. They had always believed in their destiny to dominate, but for those 2 decades, their only destiny was now survival. And then they found it. A world long forgotten. A fragment of their ancient empire lost to memory. Dromund Kaas. The forgotten world. In the ancient empire, Dromund Kaas had been nothing more than a colonial holding of the old Sith Empire. It was not sacred like Korriban, nor central like Ziost. It was a frontier outpost, a source of resources, and pretty much little else. When the Republic crushed the Empire, Dromund Kaas was abandoned, and its hyperspace routes obscured. In the centuries that followed, it slipped deeper into obscurity, erased from galactic memory. To the Sith exiles, its obscurity was its greatest strength. Remote, hidden deep within the treacherous space. Dromund Kaas became the perfect sanctuary. Here, Emperor Vitiate declared that the Sith would rebuild. The survivors descended into the jungles of the world and established a small settlement there. At first, it was little more than a refugee camp, a desperate effort to endure. But Vitiate was not content with mere survival. He was shaping not only a refuge, but the foundation of a reborn empire. But next came the corruption. Dromund Kaas became more than just a hiding space. It became a world forged in the image of the Emperor's will. Its storms cloaked it from detection, its dangers shielded it from intrusion, and its growing aura of dark power served as both fortress and symbol. And at the center of the storm, the settlement grew. The Sith survivors dug deeper into the jungles, cutting through vines and stone to lay the first foundations of what would become Kaas City. At first, it was small clusters of shelters, then districts, then sectors. As the decades raged on, the settlement swelled with new arrivals, Sith drawn from across the remnants of their people, slaves brought to work the land, merchants willing to risk the storms for profit. Slow, inexorably, the small jungle outpost began to grow into a metropolis. But from its very birth, the city was different from any Sith city that had ever come before. Coruscant had been a necropolis, a graveyard of tombs. Ziost had been a capital of old power, ceremonial and arcane. Dromund Kaas, though, was something new. Born in exile, cloaked in storms, and fueled by the Emperor's corruption, it was a city forged in secrecy and survival. There was no mere refuge here. This was the seed of vengeance. And as the city began to rise, so too did the power of the Sith who had fled into the shadow. From the brink of extinction, they were about to transform into the greatest threat the galaxy had ever seen. It stood as the living heart of the reconstituted Sith Empire, the base from which fleets launched, wars were planned, and vengeance against the Republic was made into a reality. But what made the city remarkable was not only its function as a military stronghold, it was a metropolis. A vast, high-functioning society under Sith rule where millions of beings lived, worked, and endured beneath the shadow of the dark side. The structure of the city. At its core, Kaas City was divided into 6 great hubs, districts that reflected the Empire's complexities. Each hub was more than a simple administrative zone. They were layers of a functioning city where day-to-day lives of Sith citizens unfolded under the control of their masters. Hub 1, the closest to the Imperial Citadel, where ministries of state functioned. Here, bureaucrats, officers, and Sith aides managed the logistics of the Empire. This was the face of the Sith Order. Hub 2 dominated by barracks and command centers. Soldiers marched in formation, officers shouted orders, and war machines moved through its squares. Hub 3, the Ministry of Travel and its sprawling complexes. Here, civilians and merchants navigated the bureaucracy of moving in and out of the storm-wrapped world. It was here where the Empire's isolation was carefully controlled. Hub 4 and 5, spaceports, markets, and industrial sectors. Merchants sold supplies, smugglers thrived under Sith patronage, and laborers, many of them enslaved, maintained the infrastructure of the city. Hub 6, residential quarters, where Imperial citizens, families, and even low-ranking Sith apprentices lived in tightly controlled districts. Each hub reflected a piece of Sith society. Together they formed something greater, a city that was both a capital and a living machine of Imperial order. But what of the Citadel? At the city's heart loomed the Imperial Citadel, a monolithic structure of black stone and metal. To those who gazed upon it, it was a symbol of Sith dominance, unshakable, immovable, towering above the sprawling city. Within the Citadel, power was concentrated into 2 centers: the Emperor himself, veiled in secrecy, a godlike figure whose presence few ever encountered. Then there was the Dark Council, 12 Sith Lords each presiding over a sphere of influence: military, strategy, intelligence, logistics, and so on. For the average citizen, the Citadel was untouchable. Few entered, and fewer ever exited. But its shadow dominated every street of the city, both physically and symbolically. It reminded all who lived there that the Sith did not merely command armies, they commanded life itself. But what was daily life like there? It is easy to imagine a Sith capital as a place of constant bloodshed and duels in the streets, and while fear was ever present, Kaas City was a functioning society. This is partially why I wanted to explore it in this video. It had rhythm, a pulse, and a way of life that sustained millions of Sith. For civilians, Imperial citizens lived under strict order. Families raised children in residential sectors, workers filled the bureaucratic ministries, and merchants kept the markets alive. They lived with a degree of stability, so long as they all obeyed. Then you had the slaves and the laborers, the foundation of the city's infrastructure. They maintained the streets, harvested the food, and served in households. Their lives were harsh, but their suffering was hidden beneath the order of the city. Then you had the merchants and the smugglers. Despite its storms, Kaas City was a hub of commerce. Weapons dealers, spice runners, and black market trades thrived here, their profits taxed and regulated by Sith officials. The city's spaceports were alive with constant activity. But then we have the military. Soldiers drilled daily in the barracks of Hub 2. The city resounded with the march of boots, the hub of speeders, and the presence of war machines. Kaas City was not only a metropolis, it was a garrison. Then you had the actual Sith. Lords, apprentices, and acolytes walked the city streets. Their presence commanded fear. They trained in academies, schemed in hidden chambers, and vied for influence within the Dark Council. For an ordinary citizen, life in the city was a balance of opportunity and terror. Advancement was possible through loyalty and service. Failure could mean enslavement or death. It was an atmosphere of fear and order. The city was unlike Coruscant in one crucial way though. Where Coruscant thrived on diversity and light, Kaas City thrived on fear and control. Every district was patrolled, every ministry was tightly regulated, the Emperor's secret police rooted out dissenters. The very storms above seemed to echo the will of the Sith Empire, a reminder that even nature itself bent to their command. And yet, within this oppression, there was stability. Crime was punished harshly, order was maintained. Merchants found profit, civilians built lives. The city functioned not in spite of Sith dominance, but because of it. Kaas City proved that the Sith were capable of more than destruction. They could build, they could govern, they could sustain a society, not one simply built on liberty or compassion, but one built on hierarchy, discipline, and fear. It was from this city that the Sith rebuilt their galactic power. The Great Galactic War was launched from its spires, fleets poured from its spaceports, armies marched from its barracks. Entire campaigns were directed from the Imperial Citadel. At its height, Kaas City presided over half of the galaxy. Entire civilizations lived and died by the decrees that issued from its ministries. The Emperor's voice, spoken through the Dark Council, reached every corner of the Empire. Kaas City was not simply a simple city itself, it was the dark heart of civilization. A mirror of Coruscant. It was a city that rose from desperation, thrived in secrecy, and presided over an empire that once ruled the galaxy. But as with every Sith creation, its greatness carried with it seeds of its own undoing. The story of its fall is not one of fire or conquest. The Republic did not storm its walls. The Jedi did not burn its citadels. Kaas City crumbled in silence, undone not by enemies, but by the Sith themselves. The key to its downfall began with the Emperor's withdrawal. The man who had given Kaas City its form and its storms, who had shaped the very world through ritual, began to vanish. Emperor Vitiate, whose patience and wisdom had rebuilt the Sith, withdrew from its throne. His ambitions had turned inward, towards ritual of immortality and godhood. For centuries he obsessed over consuming entire worlds, bending life itself to his will. Kaas City, once the seat of power, was reduced to a staging ground for his greater designs. Without the Emperor's presence, the Dark Council grew in influence. But where he had been a unifying figure, the Council was a nest of rivals. Ambition clashed with ambition. Spheres of influence warred in secret. And though the city still functioned, the cracks beneath its surface widened. It was a slow fracturing. The Great Galactic War and the conflicts that followed drained the Sith. Campaigns burned resources faster than they could be replenished. Worlds seceded. Rebellions flared. The city remained its capital, but its lifeblood weakened. The 6 hubs that had once thrummed with activity began to strain under the weight of instability. Ministries fractured with corruption. The military, once disciplined, was spread thin. Civilians endured stricter controls as resources dwindled. And yet, the most destructive force was not the Republic, it continued to be the Sith themselves. The Dark Council's endless scheming, assassination, and betrayal left the Empire paralyzed. For every victory won in war, another was lost to Sith ambition. Kaas City was the center of this rot, a metropolis whose order depended on leaders who no longer cared to preserve it. And so the world reclaimed its own. Beyond politics, the very environment of Dromund Kaas turned against the city. The Emperor's rituals had poisoned the skies, twisting the world into a storm-racked wasteland. For as long as the Empire was strong, Kaas City endured. Its infrastructure held the storms at bay. Its people bent the jungle to their will. But when the Empire's strength fractured, so too did its control over the world. The storms grew harsher, unchecked by Sith sorcery. The jungles pressed inward. Wildlife twisted by centuries of corruption prowled closer to the city's edge. Stone cracked. Monuments wore down. The jungle began to reclaim what had been carved from it. And then, the silence. No single moment marks the fall of the city. No siege, no climactic destruction. Instead, its decline stretched over centuries. One by one, all of it went dark. The barracks emptied. Families departed or were killed. And the Citadel itself stood once as the embodiment of dominance, stood hollow. Its chambers abandoned. Its halls echoed with silence. But the city didn't fall immediately. It withered. By the time of Luke Skywalker's era, nearly 4 millennia later, it remained standing only as ruins. Abandoned, silent, swallowed by the storm. The greatest Sith metropolis had become a ghost, forgotten by the galaxy that it had once ruled. The ruins of the city carried with them a truth more haunting than its destruction. The Republic had not needed to defeat it. The Jedi had not needed to invade. The city proved that every age of Sith history reveals that the Sith do not need enemies to bring about their downfall. They will do it themselves. They carry with them their own ruin. Its rise had been forged by desperation, its strength maintained by order and fear, and its fall inevitable. Because the Sith could not escape themselves. The Dark Council devoured itself in endless rivalry, and the city that once stood as a mirror to Coruscant was left empty not by war, but by neglect. I wanted to make this video because Kaas City really shows something important. While the Sith rule is possible for a time, they will always eventually tear themselves apart. It's a pattern we see time and time again throughout Star Wars, from Sidious to Maul, to empires to individuals. What makes the city fascinating is that when we think of the Sith, we usually imagine them in small numbers, plotting in the shadows or dominating on a battlefield. We don't picture them as a functioning civilization, a society that mirrors something closer to Coruscant, or even our own massive cities in our world. Kaas City forces us to confront that possibility, and its ruins remind us why it could never last. Thank you so much for watching, Lore Junkies. If you enjoyed this dive into the Sith's greatest city, be sure to leave a like down below, as well as your thoughts and comments. Subscribe for more forbidden lore, and I hope you're having an enlightened, phenomenal day.